Welcome to the Essence of Recovery, a podcast from the Athens Area Commencement Center. I'm Shauna Harris, here with my co-host, Brendan Leahy. Our guest today is Jim Hinzman, who has been part of the Commencement Center since it was founded in 1978 and served as its owner and director beginning in 2003. So when we talk about the history of addiction treatment in Athens and the evolution of the Commencement Center itself, Jim has quite literally been here from the beginning. Over the course of his career, he's watched the field change dramatically, from the early days of inpatient treatment to the development of outpatient care, aftercare, and a much better understanding of addiction as a disease of the brain. And this conversation is personal, too. Jim was actually the first face of recovery Brendan encountered when he reached out for help. This is a conversation about what we've learned, what we've gotten wrong, what actually helps people get well, and why hope has always been at the heart of this work. Here's our conversation with Jim Hinzman.
I just want to welcome you, and I don't know if you know this or not, but you're the first face of recovery that I ever encountered. That you're the person that answered the phone when I reached out for help, and it was very casual. I said, I'm looking for this, and I didn't know my ass from my elbow in terms of recovery. And you said, come on in. And I went in and we sat down, we talked. You did kind of an intake. And then at the end, you were like, well, we could start now. We could start tomorrow. And then my only issue was I had a couple of things at home and I had a couple of things at work that if I had dropped the ball on those things, it would have just been, my life would have been a disaster. And I said to you, I'm completely motivated and I want to do this, but can you give me a couple of days? And you said, I wouldn't recommend it, but I'll work with you. And you did. And it was that flexibility that made me come back. That if somebody had given me a hard line and a no, and this is what you got to do, yeah, I probably would have said, go pound sand. And I probably wouldn't have got into recovery. So it was your approach that got the ball rolling for me. So I want to thank you because you got me rolling on all of this that has made my life better.
Well, the big, and we begin to talk a little bit about the difference between outpatient and inpatient. Inpatient, people who got criteria for inpatient, you're going to die.
Yeah.
You're going to have a seizure. You're going to die. Outpatient's different. People do have issues that they got to put together first before they can do the treatment stuff.
Yeah.
Meaning job and family.
Yeah.
And I've always been aware of that. When people call up on the phone or drive up in the driveway, that's plenty of motivation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now the staff's got to get out of the way and allow folks to continue to do the right thing. The first right thing was showing up.
Yes. And I was really worried. I thought, this is terrible, but I had visions of somebody slapping a straitjacket on me and strapping me down to a chair. I thought about losing control of my life. And that was one of the reasons I didn't want to do treatment. I didn't want to, I wanted to retain control of my life and I wanted to have some input on the process. And I was so happy to hear somebody say, yeah, we're going to work with you on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's important, clinical staff is way out of touch if they think they're going to change all the pathologies.
Right.
Meaning you're going to do treatment for 6 weeks, but you're also going to hang on to some pathologies that's worked to your good and to your detriment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're doing is really, initially, 6 weeks is not anything more than stabilization. You're going to do the work once you leave here.
Right.
And that has everything to do about, hopefully in 6 weeks, the brain is beginning to get a little better. You're sleeping better. Memory's better. You're less stressful. You're back to work. And your family's like you again.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kick off into another realm. One of the things that really affected me, that I was working for the mental health center here in Athens. I didn't see anybody get better. I did not see psychiatric patients get better. I did not see addiction patients get better. It was always set up on a crisis model. you know. And the biggest problem was folks wouldn't take their medicines, or they would not do the stuff to keep the brain better. It just, so inevitably, the addiction's going to kick up, or the psychiatric condition was going to kick up. No one got better. And within 3 months, those internships lasted about 3 months. I was wore out.
I bet.
And here's the other thing I saw. The clinical staff took no responsibility for what they weren't able to complete. Now you're going to hear AA will tell you just didn't work hard enough.
Right.
Or you just don't want it enough. Instead of AA saying, oh, what's going on in AA that this isn't working for this guy? Or for clinical staff to say, what's going on within the treatment center that it's not working? And counselors were notorious to say, it's his problem, not mine. I ain't taking responsibility for it. And no one got better because staff was not willing to look at themselves also. Not every counselor and client is a match.
It's a relationship.
But with addiction clients, they are always the thumping board. They are always the problem. And when you have so much shame, you just swallow it and take it.
Mm-hmm.
And say, I guess so. I'm the problem.
And all that just feeds the stigma.
It just feeds the stigma. And see, I really don't think during the 6 weeks of treatment, there's very little therapy that happens. What you're dealing with therapy and treatment, you're really addressing shame, guilt, trauma to some degree, and very little trauma. In fact, when I was directing the program, one of the things I said, we don't stir up trauma because you can't put it back together in 6 weeks.
Right.
Whatever comes up, we don't ignore it. We talk about it, but we don't get in there and stir it up, So the therapy is about helping people to begin to identify, I am worthwhile getting better. I am doing the right things. I'm going to be as honest as I can. Those are all therapy, counseling issues. But at the core of it's just maintaining stability as the brain continues to get well. Because you can drink yourself into a sick brain that will never get better. They are some people constitutionally, that's what the old medical director used to say, he's constitutionally unable to get better. All we're going to be able to do is detoxing. He's going to be back over and over and over. In inpatient treatment, you always got to be sicker than you are. You understand what I've just said? And what I mean by that is you always had to dig around in people's psyche and inpatient to do something for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Just how much more digging you really got to, and also, you're looking for criteria. Now the insurance plays a part of that too.
Right.
And particularly inpatient, because if you don't have medical necessity for inpatient treatment, they're not going to pay.
Yeah.
And back in those days, we didn't have outpatient treatment. No one had outpatient treatment. In fact, those people who were doing inpatient treatment was so threatened by outpatient that they would do everything they could to get rid of outpatient treatment.
Interesting.
But the interesting part of that is it was reimbursed more. You understand the 28-day program, you know how we got the 28-day program? That's because a treatment center in Minnesota said insurance will pay for 28 days. Therefore, everybody's going to do 28 days. And those things bothered me because it's not true disease treatment. Because some brains are going to get better quicker. Some are going to take longer. Some could benefit from 8 weeks of treatment because they can't sleep. They're still anxious. They're still stressful. And they need to continue to drill down on those co-occurring issues. And our therapy was interesting. Our therapy, particularly in the group when we had what we call reality therapy, experiential therapy, and then the big bad boy was psychotherapy. Even universities were teaching psychotherapy as a legitimate therapy to deal with trauma. So we would go into a therapy room, two of us, and we would recreate the trauma, thinking that recreating it would get rid of it. And of course, my argument was, by the time we finished them in group, they're ready to go drink.
Right. Rightly so.
Rightly so. And that's what I'm saying. Treatment was an adversary. Therapy I like the most is reality therapy, because you begin to tie in behaviors to drinking patterns in a very non-threatening way.
So walk me through, what does reality therapy look like?
Reality therapy, okay, so I go downtown to drink coffee, where downtown Athens is a hot spot for drinking. I go down there to drink coffee at the coffee shops, and my motivation is to drink coffee. But when I get back out of there 2 weeks later, I'm wanting to drink. Well, what happened was they put themselves back into a familiar environment, which was associated to their drinking, even though they're drinking coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reality therapy is, what are you getting out of going downtown? Let's talk about it honestly.
Just even flirting with.
Even flirting with.
Yes. Okay.
Even flirting with.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, if you're going to treat diseases, you got to begin to understand relapse. Cancer, you either stay in remission or you're not.
Right.
Remission is doing well. Falling out of that is relapse. So you're trying to stay in remission.
Right.
Okay. If we're treating disease processes, folks are going to have episodic relapses, either brief or long term. Now, a brief relapse would say, let's come in and let's talk about where you've been putting your places around people, places, and things, setups and triggers, and begin to figure out a plan to avoid those things, or to give you an understanding this is what's going to happen to your brain when you go down there, that your brain's not normal down there.
Right.
It's associated to the most important thing in your life, and that's drinking and using.
Yeah.
You know? So reality therapy is identifying the setups and triggers and putting a plan around how to avoid. And I do think time stabilizes the brain. People have less obsessions over a period of time than they do the first 6 months.
That's been my experience.
And I watched that. I know a good story of mine was I got a history of coaching a lot of youth sports, and one of the guys who coached with me, my assistant coach, was and was a good friend of mine, was an alcoholic. Little did I know he was drinking that way, because when I saw him, he looked fine. And he came into treatment. Plenty smart. Dad was a physician here in this town. So now we're talking about, is this disease a dumb disease or an intelligent disease, or what kind of disease is it? You know, you should know better. Okay. And the truth of it is most alcoholics know better, which means that's out of the equation at early recovery. But, John came in treatment. He did treatment great. I mean, he was the best student in the group. Did good. I usually share this story in groups when I was doing them, because John gave me the first insight. But what happened, and he got into aftercare. By the way, back in the 80s, we didn't have aftercare and treatment.
Okay.
Just done and then move on.
For the reason for it is aftercare was never reimbursed. Hospitals could not afford it.
So again, it's an insurance, a financial decision.
And so I figured out through an alcoholic lady, she's dead now. She came in, she said to me, Jim, she says, I want to work here. And She's an Athens lady. Everybody knew her. She said, I want to start up aftercare. She said, now I'll do that. I'll volunteer to set it up. But if it works, you're going to pay me. That's the first time. And then I had 2 women knock on my door who was absolutely upset with the commencement center. And both of them, I knew it was going to be a bad day when 2 of them show up. I know it's going to be a bad day. But they said, Jim, we're sick and tired of you cuddle our husbands. You tell them how sweet they are and you pat them on the head and da, 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 da. And she said, you're doing absolutely nothing for the family members who had the same pathologies develop out trying to manage their stress with someone who's out of control.
Yeah.
Anyway, she started aftercare, and she started couples aftercare. Now, I would give Athens Regional Medical Center, that's what it was back in those days. They started paying this woman, and we had no reimbursement for it. So aftercare cost them nothing. Nothing. So this CEO said, and I think he was about ready to think about, we need to get out of this business. He said, I need to know where the treatment works.
Mm-hmm.
So we hired an outcome study group out of St. Paul. They've spent a lot of money, thousands of dollars. They got on the phone and they called people up and they looked at age and all the demographics that you could think of. But what they really couldn't never put the finger on is what worked, except aftercare.
Mm-hmm.
For people who were willing to step into aftercare 1 hour a week, those folks did really well. But there's a reason for that with the brain. What that means is the prefrontal cortex, and I'm sure one of your speakers talked about that. Your prefrontal cortex is your rational, logical part of your brain. It helps you to manage your life. It tells you not to go downtown and drink coffee because that can be a setup for you. But what we found was aftercare was the thing that was working. Irregardless of the young, the old, irregardless of all the demographics, it all worked out the same way. Or aftercare in AA or NA. But what we found was AA worked. So go back to my friend, John.
Okay.
After about 3 weeks in aftercare, he came back into the counselor and he said how good it's working. Okay. And he appreciated it. A couple more weeks after that, now we're back into a month and a half. He said, there used to be a bar downtown, big bar. It's called the Frog Pond. And people would show up there to watch big screen TV and watch Georgia play football. And so he decided he was going to go down there and watch big screen TV, drink Coca-Colas. So he came back to tell the aftercare counselor how good he did. He didn't drink, drank Coca-Colas. A few more weeks after that, listen to how the brain and the prefrontal cortex begins to fail. After that, he said, you know what? I had 1 beer. That's all I wanted. Now we really got relapse set up, which ended up, he quit aftercare because he wasn't an alcoholic anymore. He didn't need that structure anymore because he's already figured out how to do it, And that's the detriment of an injured prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
And the story goes on. John was needing detox, within 3 months. Again, this is a bright, intelligent, successful man with beautiful kids, and wife was a school teacher. And then the medical director came to me one day, this is sometime later, and he said, you see that guy down the hallway? He said he won't ever be sober. It's too much damage. It's too much brain disease, and he will never be able to stop drinking. This guy died. When he died sober after 20 years of recovery.
Wow.
Who wasn't supposed to make it.
Mm-hmm.
John should have made it.
Yeah.
My friend should have made it. Out of that ordeal, I think about those two examples a lot because it talks about brain disease, how alcohol and drugs affects all the brain. I mean, this guy couldn't stand upright. His cerebellum was injured enough that he'd fall if you didn't catch it. And the last time I saw him, he had one of these brand new, what I call one-seater Thunderbird convertible. Sober. The only thing that worked was aftercare in AA. After we got folks through the medical necessity, the medical piece of that, from then on is all about continuing to find a way to treat this disease adequately enough. And we don't know what's adequate.
For each person, that could be different.
Could be, and that's related to the disease of the brain.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the person, there's so many variables and each person brings to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So God bless that we got treatment. We still have inpatient treatment. Today, if you're going to go to inpatient treatment, you better be able to write a check somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000.
Wow.
And we still don't do assessments well enough to say who needs that $30,000 treatment or who can benefit from $5,000 treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Because money's driving it so hard.
Yeah.
Physicians in this state, for an example, I don't care how smart you are or where you are in the disease process, you're going to spend 3 months inpatient treatment. Everybody comes into a level of treatment accordingly to what the damage is to their brain. And you can't treat them all the same.
Right.
What that does for outpatient treatment is you got to have better staff to do outpatient treatment than you do inpatient.
Because they're going out and getting exposed to all sorts of things. You have to be able to handle that.
For folks who know Commencement Center, almost everybody who starts Commencement Center, this model has been able to be successful in a way. Most people who come in the door, finish treatment, and whether they go to aftercare or go to AA, that's a different story. But we still do not do a good enough assessment or have the knowledge to do a good enough assessment for me.
To satisfy you.
To satisfy me.
Okay.
Satisfy me. I think the best therapists or counselors work in outpatient treatment because they have to.
Mm-hmm.
Because people die mistreating this disease too.
Yeah.
When the hospital administration said, we're not going to do inpatient anymore, we're going to do outpatient. The medical director came to me, he said, are they crazy? Because if we let them out, they won't ever come back. Now that's how we all felt about that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that they were not going to come back.
You didn't have any other experience.
And little did we know that people who drove into the parking lot got out of the car and walked in the door and say, I need some help. Those are pretty high motivated people.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Or they wouldn't be there. That's what makes outpatient different. But when we add the detox component, again, inpatient said they are crazy. But I got to say to you, I cannot within the last, my memory's not as good as it used to be, within the last 20 or 30 years, I can't tell you of hardly having a detox episode that didn't work. If you got the staff that's on top of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You have to come in, you got to reevaluate withdrawal signs, every day. And you've got to begin to figure out a protocol, detox protocol, which is an art. Some needs more.
Right.
Some needs less.
Mm-hmm.
You don't give them all sometimes. They don't need that much. Younger ones, their brains may not need much detox, you know. But when you add the detox piece to that, it really, I don't know why the market isn't doing so much more outpatient detox than 6 weeks of treatment. Because I think it's a model that's much more humanizing, less shame. People can go back to work and they can go home to their families. Where did we get in our head with inpatient that you have to isolate folks? Now, there are some folks who just can't stop drinking for 48 hours or 72 hours. They probably need more structure than an outpatient program.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But inpatient treatment, in my opinion, should be the least of that. You cannot remove people from their communities and their setups and triggers and expect them to understand what they need to change. I remember a lady who said, I just can't go into the grocery stores. I will sit out in the car and just sit there because when I go into the grocery store, I can't go by the beer and the wine areas without drinking.
Yeah.
Well, we would have never gotten to that had she been inpatient treatment.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And that's an opportunity to kind of learn.
It's reality therapy.
Yeah.
Is it, you know what? Why don't you take a family member with you for the next 5 times?
Yeah.
And let them walk with you.
Because people say, stay away from it. Well, you can't go get gas without seeing alcohol in a pyramidal pile displaying something.
Yeah. And then, the other thing, and I had talked a whole lot, and I think genetics is another big play to this. People who have a strong genetic background, I don't know if it's just for alcoholism or brain disease, are going to have a harder time. They're going to have more psychiatric conditions. They're going to have maybe more anxiety, more depression. But an outpatient program should be set up in the community so people can show up and say, I need a little bit more help before I drink, and feel that it's okay, that I'm not going to miss any work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going back home.
Mm-hmm.
I just need to come into an environment to help me to settle my brain down.
Yeah.
So that's my argument into the fact that community-based treatment, like hospitals, community-based hospitals, or your family practice doctor, or the oncologist, you're able to get in your car and say, we got a problem, and let's go fix it. I need a little help.
And the phrase I've heard you use before is ambulatory treatment, ambulatory detox, right?
Yes.
That's what distinguishes us.
And, this program here detoxes from all that, all of it. I worry more about an alcohol detox than I do drug detox.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all, have their potency and their, and then also today is with the young ones, you got to mix alcohol and drugs.
Right.
And possibly a psychiatric condition, dual diagnosed.
Mm-hmm. See, in substance use disorders, we are not trained to diagnose psychiatry. And the certification and licensure says you got to stay within that scope, your scope of practice. What we talk about is co-occurring disorders. Well, what is co-occurring disorders? Co-occurring disorders is depression, anxiety, insomnia, memory dysfunctions, stress.
Mm-hmm.
And we hadn't said much about stress yet. So people get in touch with all this trauma work. And we found out now the CFR hormone is not working for the alcoholic and the addict. Alcoholics were notorious about creating crises in their life. Is that one would throw, they'd bump into a stressful situation that they created themselves. Okay. Because the brain is wanting to drink and drug, create that setup again. But stress is a major setup.
Before we go into stress, can you explain the CFR hormone?
What it is, that is a hormone that allows us to manage stressful situations.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's clinical enough, but what it means is we should have enough of that hormone to manage joblessness, family issues, having a car wreck. The brain that's part of its moderation and helps us to stay stable.
For the substance use disordered person, is that part of the brain offline, so to speak?
Yeah. And so that hormone is depleted.
Okay.
Or less of. And that's why alcoholics and addicts are great at making mountain out of molehills. There's never a small setup. Every setup is gigantic, like the world is coming to an end. And if I don't fix it quick, and the brain is taught what fixes it.
Right.
And see, substances. And family members would come in with clients as I was doing assessments, and they would say, I don't know what his problem is. I don't know why he keeps wanting to drink. Well, the problem is alcohol is working better than anything else in the brain to manage the condition.
It works when it's working.
It's working when it's working.
Then, right. When I came into the treatment center, when I was being evaluated, I articulated because I didn't know all this stuff, but intuitively I had a hunch about what you were talking about. And I said, I don't think I have a drinking problem. I have an anxiety problem that has become a drinking nightmare. That was exactly, but my issue primarily was anxiety, and alcohol was a glorious solution for 2 hours.
That's right. And there is truthful. Some folks have an anxiety disorder. Mm-hmm. To ignore that, we would say to you, it'll pass. Well, somebody who's anxious and they feel like the world's coming apart, and their heart in their chest, feel like, that is not a solution. It'll pass.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath, I've been told. That's great.
But you're right. And see, with dopamine, once the brain learns that alcohol works better than dopamine, the game's on.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There is not enough dopamine in our brain, not enough pleasure created by dopamine that will get me what I get out of a drink of liquor or 2 drinks of liquor.
Or 22.
Or 22.
Hypothetically.
But if you look at that, there's a science to that too. See, craving says something about dopamine deficiency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I stop craving and I stop the obsessions, it means that part of the brain seems to be working correctly. So if you can help people where they have a place to go and talk about craving. Now, you raise craving with your family, oh my God, they think everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
You come in here into the treatment center and say, I'm craving. It should be a place that you come and say, let's talk about that.
Pull up a chair, get in line.
Pull up a chair and get in line. Because I'm sure you are.
Yeah, we all are.
Yeah, I'm sure you are.
Mm-hmm.
But talking about it empowers the prefrontal cortex. That is, what's my plan? If this is sick, I think the prefrontal cortex, and it getting better, is more important than the midbrain that's actively wanting to drink.
Mm-hmm.
Because when prefrontal cortex is not working, it does not manage those instinctual impulses, primitive instinctual impulses. So the next question is, how long does it take for the prefrontal cortex to get better? We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
What we say, 6 months to a year.
Okay.
And some people will say 2 years. But it's about convalescence. It's about creating a structure around you, which is better, that you have figured out different ways to manage. Aftercare, AA, support groups, church, maybe for some folks,
Mm-hmm.
allows that to work for the brain in spite of itself. So if you sit around and think about, is my prefrontal cortex working or not? You don't know. But I'm making terrible decisions. And I'm going back down to the frog pond. It will always come out as I go back into those setups is that I'm more in control today.
Mm-hmm. And most people coming in for help, they don't know that. They don't know how to look at what a trigger is and what their triggers are. So we need a place to come and get educated.
So you got a foot in the community and a foot in medical care.
Yes.
I think that's the best model. And it's the cheapest model.
Mm-hmm.
Because you got to remember, again, inpatient, it's clinical staff, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
Multiply that money and you'll see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So, and and another area that I looked at is that the people who got in what we call here the professional program.
Tell us a little bit about that.
That's made up primarily of healthcare people with a license.
Okay.
Okay. And out of that group, out of the aftercare group, 80% of those folks stay sober and clean who come once a week for 2 years. Isn't that interesting?
That's a glorious number.
That's a glorious number. And see, inpatient treatment refuses to accept that. Inpatient, when we were doing inpatient without aftercare, probably no more than 10% of the people stayed sober and clean. That really bothered me.
Mm-hmm.
I began to think I'm in a profession that I can't go to the grocery stores. I don't want to run into family members. That's just overwhelming. And then aftercare, we found out through that study, 80% of those folks who were attending aftercare were still sober and clean after 2 years.
Numbers don't lie,
No.
do they?
And then what we also found, though, for the professional group, your licensing board tells you, irregardless of what you think about wanting to come or not come, the board says you're going to come if you're going to have a license.
Mm-hmm.
Out of that group, over 90% of them, which says, again, something about the prefrontal cortex and those people who structure that up. Not everybody has a licensure that says you got to do this. But for folks who enter into, I think, that kind of a supportive commitment where, coming in is not shameful.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing about, if you have any other medical disease, you're probably going to need support along with that.
Mm-hmm.
You got to continue to think about, if I'm a diabetic, how do I manage my craving for the sweets I want to eat? I need to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard in the community of recovery in Athens feedback on aftercare, and it's always glowing. People talk about the accountability and seeing the same faces week after week. They become part of a family of sorts.
Yeah.
And that connection,
Mm-hmm.
I think, I've heard that connection is the opposite of addiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also found it that you talked about, aftercare is 1 hour a week. For me, it was more than that because it was in your brain. You knew just that little quiet whisper in the back of your head as you walk to the grocery store or you go get gasoline, and you're faced with the demons. Well, I'm going to be held accountable next week. Not that I wasn't totally motivated, but it was also nice to have another layer of like, well, that's another reason.
Right. So the brain is consistently, all of our life is creating pathways of behavior. They just don't magically show up. It really is like a pathway. Is that you start some journey somewhere and it becomes a part of who you are. So support is a start somewhere. And what you just said is correct. It's like if I don't go, something's wrong. If I don't go to church, I feel like something's wrong. That's a neural pathway. And so you develop that around the community and these processes. Can you ever go to a tailgate and manage a craving? Maybe so. But surely not after 6 weeks of treatment.
No.
Or I had a guy who was an insurance guy, and he was so proud of himself and did good treatment, so proud of himself, that he was going to reward his wife after treatment. Now, he didn't tell anybody about this until the last week of treatment. He was going to reward his wife for supporting him and sticking with him and taking her on a cruise.
I can already tell this doesn't end well.
Yeah.
Impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, there's drinking in every part of that vessel. But in his mind, that talks about the injury here in the prefrontal cortex. In his mind, that was a beautiful thing to do. That's a rationalizational thing to do in order to get back into a drinking position.
Yeah.
Let me say something about trauma.
Okay.
The field's kind of shifted. I don't know why we're training people so much about trauma counseling. Because trauma counseling is a big deal. You got to, as a counselor, as a clinical person, you need to know how much trauma you can do and how much you leave alone. If you got a place in your head that your trauma is what I call dormant or not active, you might want to leave it be. Trauma should be something that is interrupting your life and you're not coping with it. Trauma work and treatment of addiction, as you know, many of the folks, almost probably everybody who comes into treatment got some trauma work in addiction, from addiction.
Sure.
Again, inside the clinical program, you got to decide what you're going to deal with and what you're not going to deal with. And some folks have quite well, and I'm thinking about our serviceman who's had traumatic trauma from the service, from wartime. Sometimes it's better to leave it alone than to open it up. You got to figure that out. And you got to be pretty bright to figure that out,
Mm-hmm.
But in treatment, I always said during treatment teams, I'd say, we're not going to open that up. I mean, the history says there's a lot of it there. But if this person's not wanting to talk about it, we don't poke at it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of that kind of healing takes a lot longer than 6 weeks.
Years.
Yeah.
So I think the clinical studies will tell you trauma affects the brain more than anything else, more so than substances. Instantly. That traumatic, I still remember my son rolling a four-wheeler over on top of him down in a creek. I've never forgotten that.
Mm-hmm.
How he survived that. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. But trauma doesn't go away. And I think that's not an accurate statement that you get rid of trauma. You just manage it better.
Right.
And the brain's a wonderful organ that will help you to put it in a place that makes it more manageable. So it's not being cured, it's how you manage it.
Right.
Mhm.
I'm going to draw another area and it's the same way with AA. Step 4 and 5 deals with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
First thing sponsors want to do is what? Step 4 and 5. We're going to get down to where the real stuff is. New folks in recovery don't need to get into step 4 and 5 for at least 6 months. For them, it's step 1, 2, and 3 because step 1, 2, and 3 is prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
4 and 5 is trauma. But inexperienced people or people who don't have a clinical knowledge that may be a sponsor, they can recognize 4th and 5th step stuff. It's easier to do. I'm into saying to sponsors, you listen to this, leave it alone for 6 months. And then there's a few people who will get into a fourth and fifth step quickly and seem to benefit from it. But that's all about the disease process.
Yeah.
And AA is not accurate on the disease process because they had no training.
Mm-hmm.
All they do is listen to what other people said to them. So if you want to keep people stable, I think support groups have a play in that, a big play in that. And I support AA and NA, and I always have for 40 years. But I think you need to reevaluate when's the appropriate time to do step 4 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
If folks are broken, and to measure the amount of brokenness, and you put them back in touch with that in a few weeks, you probably set up that relapse for that man or woman. But the amazing thing is the 12 steps, how it was set up. It was set up to be used over a period of time by 2 people in the 30s, 1930s, who tend to have pretty good success at it.
Mhm.
Because the 12 steps deal with prefrontal cortex. It works in spite of themselves. Or an alcoholic drinks in spite of negative consequences.
Yeah.
That's a prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
I was just about to sit on there to talk about it.
All right.
But it's an interesting thing. I could see that it's almost controversial, but to be a sponsor in AA, you have firsthand experience with addiction, and that's invaluable. That's huge.
Yes,
but
yes.
but there might be some other components that you could go down some dark roads unintentionally and cause harm.
Either the prefrontal cortex is not well enough yet, or the CFR, the stress hormone, has not set yet.
Mm-hmm.
Either one of those.
Mm-hmm.
But co-occurring disorders, when you begin to, our assessment is if you're not sleeping, you got too much anxiety, too much depression, too much stress, all of those are signs that the brain is still getting better.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so in treatment centers, we pay attention to those things. We know we got to help people to sleep and detox. We got to help them manage their anxiety or their stress, which gets confused sometimes, and we're monitoring depression. This staff monitors depression, I think, for the 2 or 3 times during treatment. They got a scale that they use, and you take that little test and helps them to decide whether you're struggling with those issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you had some advice to give someone new to working in the field of recovery, what advice would you give them?
One of the real motivation that I saw and I appreciated, I saw people come in their sickest and walk out
Mm-hmm.
with a hope on life. if you're going to be in medicine, if you want to treat a disease, that's one of the things you might appreciate working in addiction. And folks who get well are always grateful. Meaning, I don't worry about going down the aisles of a grocery store. My problem now going down the aisles of a grocery store is breaking confidentiality.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Not everybody wants to see me because of, they're still struggling a little bit with their shame. So that's one of the things. Another thing is you've got to continue to be a student the rest of your life. I think I'm talking about some stuff with managing this disease different. When I talk about treating disease, I'm talking about treating relapse. And in my business, people don't like relapse. Everybody wants to avoid it.
Sure.
But what an opportunity to restabilize folks.
Mm-hmm.
Some folks really do have to get skunked out, drunk a couple times more to come in and say, you all were right.
Yeah.
But that's treating relapse in a positive way without the shame.
Kind of in this neighborhood, I was wondering if you could briefly talk a little bit about there's two schools of thought, two philosophies, abstinence versus harm reduction. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it works for recovery.
The harm reduction.
Yeah. I don't think you can drink a little bit without remembering all the good stuff. The brain just doesn't forget it. And the prefrontal cortex has got to be affected at some level again. I do know people who have maintained that harm reduction or social drinking and using over a significant time, but it always comes back to the same thing. Whether you can drink successfully a year and controlling it,
Mm-hmm.
but always you should come back to the same place because it's a medical condition.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't a can I figure it out kind of thing.
Right. Okay.
So the disease state of the brain is what we're talking about. And in my business, when's the last time you heard of somebody having their brain, imaging of their brain? When have you ever heard of psychiatry looking at your organ?
Yeah. Never.
Not very often at all.
Yeah.
At least if I got a heart problem, people are imaging my
Well,
heart
look at it.
and they're looking at it.
Yeah.
We got to get better than that.
Mm.
I think we can identify the disease of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about, and I just want to thank you for the countless thousands of people that you've helped through the Commencement Center. You leave a legacy behind.
One of my greatest things, and you all will know this person, but I've got some of my little leaguers
Mm,
who are sober and clean today
that's great.
and getting better.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
It's got him on another team.
Yeah, I do need a shortstop.
That's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
One of the things that stayed with me from this conversation was Jim talking about watching people come into treatment at their sickest and then walk out with hope for their lives. I think that really gets to the heart of why we do this work. Recovery isn't about getting everything right in 6 weeks. It's about giving people the time, support, and structure they need to heal, and recognizing that what works for one person may not be what works for another. Jim, thank you for sharing your experience, your wisdom, and so much of the history behind the work we continue to do today. And thank you for listening to The Essence of Recovery. I'm Shauna Harris, along with my co-host, Brendan Leahy. We'll see you next time.